Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima. Welcome back to Blue Boards. This time we're going to be checking out The Crew, The Quest for Planet 9. Made by Thomas Singh and published by Cosmos. This is a cooperative trick-taking game. You might be wondering why I'm not doing this game physically, especially since I actually own a physical copy of this, but due to just some weird circumstances going on, I wasn't able to actually get proper video done of this, but hopefully we'll be back to the proper on-the-floor screening next episode. But for now, yeah, we're just working with this. Besides, it actually helps me show off the game in a more interesting way. So, the idea of a trick-taking game is really simple, although oddly enough, it can be kind of hard to teach people. It's not a complex concept, it's just surprisingly strange in how difficult it can be for people to pick up on. But let me just give you a basic idea of how it works. So we've got 3 players here, and in the crew, the player who has the number 4 rocket in their hand, these are all dealt out randomly, by the way, I'm just showing it for the purpose of demonstration, is the one who is the commander. So in his case, he doesn't know what the other player's hands are, but he has to start the trick. So he starts the trick with a green 6. Now, the card in the middle of the trick is considered the suit card. So in this case, this is a green, so the suit is green. It's also a 6, so it's currently the highest in winning the trick. The second player needs to follow along with a green if they've got one, otherwise they can choose to play a card of a different color. So in this case, they do have a card of the same suit, so they will be playing it out. They will be playing out the green 8. Now the 8 is higher than the 6 and it is on suit, so technically the second player is now winning the trick. The third player, and you know what, just for the sake of it, let's just pretend this player doesn't have any greens in their hand. The third player doesn't have any greens in their hand, so they're going to be playing out a yellow 9. Now the yellow 9 is higher than the 8, but it is not on suit. It is not the suit that the trick started with, so they cannot win the trick. So the winner of the trick, by being the highest card on suit, is player 2. So they will take all of the cards used in the trick and flip them face down to show that they have been taken. Although technically you are allowed to see the last trick in this game, but when the next trick comes along, then you flip these upside down so that the other players cannot see them. It is an exercise in card counting more than anything else. With that said, there are some other ways to play around with tricks, mainly the trump cards, which are in this case rockets. If a rocket gets played out in the middle of a trick, so let's just say that these two are out and then the third player were to play this, they would win because rockets trump all other suits, even the on-suit suit. So they would just immediately win the trick. However, if a player starts a trick with a rocket, the rocket is considered on suit and everybody else has to follow along if they can. So he'd have to follow along with the 3, he'd have to follow along with the 4, and then it would just proceed as normal. That is genuinely all there is to trick taking as a concept. It can be kind of hard to get, but once you get it, it just kind of sticks in there. However, the crew is not competitive, it is cooperative, and it does this in a few interesting ways. So, the main way that the game does difficulty is via the task deck here. In this case, let's just say that we are on mission 7 and we need to deal out 3 task cards. So we have here the pink 2, the green 6, and the green 9. Now the player who is the commander, and we'll just assume it's this guy, needs to take one, and then the next player takes one, and then the next player takes one until all these tasks are divvied around. And now, the player with the cards in front of them needs to win that particular card as part of a trick. So the second player needs to win the green 6, for example, and the third player needs to win the green 9. Now, there is an interesting thing about this. Remember how I said you can't actually see the other player's hands? So this does mean you have to work around all the knowledge of the cards in front of you, but thankfully this does mean that since every card in the deck is actually dealt out to every player, you know what all the cards are. In this case, it's 1 to 9 of each color and then 4 rockets numbered 1 to 4. But it also means that you also have a good idea of where most of it can be, because you've got like a third of the deck or a fourth or a fifth of the deck in your hand, so you know what you have and where everything else may be. However, you're not allowed to communicate this information with the rest of the players. Except at the beginning of a trick, once per game, you may put down a card and say, okay, this is the highest card in my hand. That is a blue. Or, if I were to play the 1 out, for example, I could put this down here and say this is the lowest card in my hand. Or, of a blue, of course. Or I could put out this green and say this is the only card in my hand of this color. And you can do this at any time. You can do it like at the second to last trick where there's only 2 cards left in everyone's hand. So you can determine when it is a smart idea to communicate what you've got and whether or not it will help the people around you in their missions. Like, for example, let's just say that you've already gotten the green 6 somehow and he needs to win the green 9. You can say that your lowest card is a green 1. This helps him out because he knows that you've got more cards. Like, I know I'm lying here, but riddle me with this. Follow me on this one. He'll know, okay, he's got more than that in his hand, but he didn't say he had the green 9 because that would have been the highest card in his hand. So he doesn't have the green 9. And let's just say this guy doesn't have the green 9. So everyone he knows where the green 9 is. He knows it's going to be in player 1's hand. And it's this communication which really sells the game, because it helps you get just enough information to try and figure out what everyone else is doing via the cards that they're playing and the way that they're going about it. However, it does mean that you have to be pretty much in tune with the rest of the players that you're playing with, and you also need to understand these strategies that I've just gone over. And it makes things really interesting, trying to figure out where everything is, trying to time your plays perfectly so that you don't end up giving up a card to another player that they don't want. Like, for example, giving this guy over here the green, the pink 2, while being this player down here would be a very bad thing to do, but sometimes you just wander into it because you just didn't have the strategy to work out. However, it is helped by the fact that all of these missions are possible, to the point where they even state so in the rulebook, and you even get like one little extra helper here. This is the distress beacon. The distress beacon is basically just a once per game, hey, everyone pass a card around to the player to your left. It does help, but it also means that you're supposed to give yourself a bit of a sort of penalty here in the logbook that you can track how long it takes you to get through a certain mission here. But honestly, yeah, it's more fun to play the game in single hands anyway, because there is a element of randomness to it, depending on what comes off the task deck, what ends up in everyone's hands and whatnot. It doesn't make the game unbeatable on every hand, but it does help out. Now, it does also mean that there are some extra things that they do in this game to make things more interesting, namely these tokens. So let's just say, for example, here that the Omega token is out, like it's supposed to be on Mission 7, and then we draw out 3... that flips twice. That's actually kind of impressive. There we go. We draw out 3, and now this card here is Omega. So this trick with this card needs to happen last, which makes things interesting when you've got 3 players trying to figure out their way around their hands. And you've got these as well. This trick must be taken first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Number 1 needs to be taken before number 2 needs to be taken before number 3. And so it adds like a little bit of interesting complexity to it. How do you play around these missions, along with how do you actually succeed in these missions? And then on top of that, they add some extra conditions to the missions as well. Like, for example, a 1 value card must win a trick. So it means that you need 1 trick with all of the 1s in there, somehow, somewhere, however you decide to do it. This one here forces the commander to pick a person that can't communicate. Poor Comey. And so on and so on. And they add more of these conditions as you go on in order to keep things interesting. So they up the difficulty, but at the same time, it's still possible to continually win every single hand by pure logic, deduction, and figuring out how your opponents are playing based on what they're communicating and what cards they're playing out. And so, it makes the crew a really interesting strategic experience in that you need to figure out the wavelengths of other players, play to their speed, or have them play to your speed if you end up with the harder set of objectives and whatnot. Finding out the right time to communicate in order to give just that big punch of information that you need in order for everyone to figure out what they need to do. And of course, since you can't talk to each other about what you've got in your hands, it makes things even more interesting because everyone needs to realize what the strategy is that you need to do immediately Although if you're new to the game and still trying to figure out the strategy, it can be a bit of a rough learning curve, trying to figure out all of this while not being absolutely crippled by the fact that you don't know what you're doing. But it's a fun enough game nonetheless, and I don't mind playing it this way. Now, there is a sequel. However, the sequel doesn't really change that much. It still has a logbook full of missions. It still has the same 40 cards. The one thing that it changes, and I'm honestly not the biggest fan of this, so let's just put all of this over here for now, because it's kind of irrelevant. The one thing that it does change, please ignore all my gay Warhammer armies. The one thing that it does change is this. This is the missions deck. And these missions are what you need to do instead of worrying about one comes first, second, or third, or what card you end up winning. And these all have their own difficulty levels, and depending on how far along you are in the missions in question in Deep Sea, you will have a certain amount of points that you need to draw out. So if you need to draw out, like, say, 5 points of missions, you draw out these two, you flip them, and then the commander has to choose one and passes on the rest to the other players in the same way that you did with these tokens. However, with these missions, it's entirely possible to get something that you just can't win, because it's just so incredibly difficult to pull off that combination of missions without basically being psychic, that it makes it my least preferred way to play the crew. I would happily play this over the other version any day, but everyone else prefers this one that I've been able to actually play the game with. That's why my copy of The Quest for Planet 9 is finding its way out via a game trade. So there are a lot of these missions as well. Like, don't get me wrong, there are 96 missions in this deck, and they are all very varied and very different from each other. It just means that you will find yourself losing a lot throughout the game. And I admit that I find it less satisfying as time goes on, because with this game, with The Quest of Planet 9, I find myself being able to sit down and think, okay, we need to get these exact cards, in this exact order, with this penalty, but we can do it with the hands that we start with. We can do this. Meanwhile, these random missions can come out and be this incredibly hard combination of things that feel like they're completely impossible, and it feels like you've wasted half an hour trying to figure out how to actually get it done. And it honestly, that sort of thing drives me mad. Being a dead man walking, or at least having it be so difficult that you might as well be a dead man walking just right off the bat, is enough to kind of drive me nuts. I'll still play it. I just like The Quest for Planet 9 and the way that it handles things better. Just because it feels like it's less random. It feels like you're more capable of handling what comes your way. But with that said, that's The Crew, The Quest for Planet 9, and some opinions on its sequel, Mission Deep Sea. I do like the idea of trick-taking being used cooperatively and limiting your communication as such that you need to figure out the strategies that your opponents are planning based purely on the little things they are allowed to communicate and what you've got in your hand and what you can surmise the other players have got in their hands. At the same time, though, if you're not good at thinking through other people's thought patterns, if this sort of card strategy doesn't appeal to you, this will probably just fall flat on its face for you. The sequel has a really cool idea in the way of this mission deck, and it does introduce a hell of a lot more variety, and it does inherently make it more replayable than The Quest of Planet 9, but at the same time, it's entirely possible to be drawn out into a hand that you can't possibly win, and it makes things just a little bit less enjoyable for me personally when we make the effort to try and win these missions only to find out that it was probably impossible to pull off, and I don't like it when games do that, personally. But yeah, with that said, this has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.